Picture an animal longer than 3 school buses, parked nose to tail, with a heart the size of a small car beating inside its chest. This is the blue whale, the largest creature to ever exist on our planet, bigger than any dinosaur that ever walked the earth. You would expect an animal this size to face constant danger. Ocean predators do the opposite, they back away. Today we drop into an ocean where a single tail strike can break bones, where a call travels hundreds of miles underwater, and where the fiercest hunters in the sea know better than to attack. If you love stories like this, hit like and subscribe before we dive in. Take a breath, we are going under. A shadow moves under a small fishing boat, longer than the boat, longer than the dock behind it. This is a blue whale, and its size breaks every scale you already carry in your head. Line it up next to what you know. A school bus stretches about 40 feet. 3 of them, nose to tail, still fall short of a full grown blue whale. A basketball court runs 94 feet end to end. One whale can stretch close to that entire length, gliding through open water like it owns the court. Now stand it up. Pull a blue whale out of the ocean and rest it on its tail, and it would tower over a 9-story building, higher than most apartment blocks in a city, higher than the tallest trees in a forest. And this creature spends its whole life horizontal, cruising below the surface, never showing you the full picture at once. Weight tells its own story. A single blue whale can weigh close to 200 tons. That is the same as 33 adult elephants, standing trunk to tail, all balanced on one invisible scale. Or picture 40 school buses packed bumper to bumper. Then imagine all of that mass moving through water at once, smooth and silent. Here's the part that stops scientists cold. Nothing this big has ever existed on Earth, not even close. The largest dinosaurs, the long-necked giants that once shook the ground, top out at around 80 tons. A blue whale beats that by more than double. Bones did not build this animal, water did. Only the ocean, pressing evenly against every inch of a body, let something grow this massive without collapsing under its own weight. Look closer and the numbers keep climbing. A blue whale's mouth can open wide enough to fit 50 people standing inside, shoulder to shoulder. Its flippers alone can stretch longer than a grown man lying flat on the ground twice over. Even the eye, small compared to the rest of the body, is still bigger than a fist. None of this happened overnight. Every blue whale alive today grew from something almost impossible to picture: a single cell, smaller than a grain of sand, floating inside its mother. From that starting point, biology built the largest animal in the history of the planet, using nothing but food, water, and time. Somewhere in the deep water right now, one of these animals is finishing a slow, deliberate turn, its whole enormous frame rotating like a building shifting shape. On the surface, nothing marks the moment. No splash, no warning, just calm water sliding over something the size of a skyscraper turned sideways. The animal itself has no idea it holds the record. It just swims, eats, and dives, unaware that it carries the title of biggest creature this planet has ever produced. Size alone does not explain why sharks turn away and orcas hesitate. That story starts somewhere much smaller, inside a mother, months before a calf ever takes its first breath. A newborn blue whale slides into the ocean for the first time, already longer than the yellow school bus that picks you up every morning. No warm-up, no easing into the world, just a sudden drop into deep water and a body already built for it. At birth, a blue whale calf measures about 23 feet long and weighs close to 3 tons. That is heavier than a fully loaded pickup truck, and this newborn has been alive for only a few minutes. Most animals spend weeks or months growing into a body that can survive on its own. A blue whale calf skips that step entirely. The growth that follows breaks every normal rule. A calf drinks up to 150 gallons of milk a day, and this milk carries far more fat than anything a human baby drinks. Whale milk looks almost like toothpaste, thick and rich, built to pack on weight fast. Every gallon pushes the calf closer to survival in an ocean full of danger. The math gets stranger the closer you look. A blue whale calf can gain around 200 pounds in a single day. That means by the end of 1 week it has added more weight than an entire adult human, just from drinking its mother's milk. Stretch that out, and within 6 months a calf can double in length, growing from 23 feet to nearly 50. Why the rush? Danger. Open ocean offers no walls, no dens, no safe corner to hide a slow growing baby. Every extra pound of blubber becomes armor. Every extra foot of length makes a calf harder to grab and harder to kill. Growing fast is not just impressive, it keeps a young whale alive. A mother blue whale times this sprint with care. She often travels to warm, sheltered waters to give birth, far from the cold feeding grounds where orcas hunt in packs. Those warm nursery waters buy her calf a few crucial months, time to grow big enough to survive the open ocean crossing that comes next. That crossing is no small trip. Once a calf is strong enough, mother and baby often travel thousands of miles back toward colder waters, where food is plentiful but predators wait. The calf that left the nursery small and unsteady arrives at that journey already transformed, fueled entirely by fat-soaked milk and constant nursing. Even with all that growth, a calf remains fragile in ways its size hides. Bones are still hardening, muscles are still learning to coordinate a body already the size of a bus. A calf that looks like a finished giant is still underneath a baby learning how to use its own enormous frame. Somewhere inside that fast-growing body, one organ is already working overtime, pumping blood through a frame that seems to grow by the hour. That organ alone could crush a small car if it ever slipped free, and its size is about to answer a question you have probably never thought to ask. A heart the size of a small car sits inside the chest of a blue whale, and every beat sends a shock wave of blood through a body longer than a basketball court. This heart weighs close to 400 pounds, roughly the weight of a large refrigerator packed with muscle instead of shelves. Scientists who have examined a blue whale heart up close describe walking around it like inspecting a car in a garage, checking each chamber the way you might check an engine. For years, nobody knew exactly how slow or fast that heart could beat inside a living, diving whale. Getting a heart rate monitor onto a free-swimming blue whale sounded almost impossible. Then a team of Stanford researchers managed to attach sensors directly onto a wild blue whale using suction cups, and what they recorded stunned even the scientists watching the data stream in. At the surface, a blue whale's heart beats around 37 times a minute, working hard to reload oxygen after a long dive. Drop that same whale down into deep water and the heart rate crashes to as low as 2 beats a minute. 2. A rate slower than almost anything else alive, held steady by an animal chasing food hundreds of feet below the waves. Picture your own heart doing that. At 2 beats a minute, blood barely seems to move, yet somehow this rhythm keeps a 200-ton body alive during dives that can stretch past 30 minutes. Every slow, powerful pulse pushes blood exactly where it needs to go, oxygen rationed out like fuel in a tank running in reserve. Then the whale surfaces and the heart flips into overdrive. Rates can spike toward 37 beats a minute almost instantly, refilling starved muscles and organs with fresh oxygen before the next dive begins. Few hearts on the planet swing between such extremes and survive the stress. Engineers who study cardiac limits find this baffling. Push a human heart to sudden extreme rate changes like this, and it risks failure. A blue whale heart appears built for exactly this kind of whiplash, cycling between near stillness and full power every single dive, over and over, for a lifespan that can stretch past 90 years. None of this would matter without the plumbing to match. A heart this powerful needs vessels wide enough to carry the blood it pumps, tunnels of muscle and tissue running the length of an entire building. Somewhere inside that network sits a passage so wide that scientists have compared its opening to something you would need to see to believe. A passage big enough, according to some researchers, for a small child to crawl straight through. Somewhere deep inside a blue whale's chest runs a tunnel of muscle wide enough, by some accounts, for a small child to crawl straight through on hands and knees. This tunnel is the aorta, the main artery that carries blood away from the heart and out to the rest of the body. In a blue whale, the aorta can stretch about 9 inches across, roughly the width of a large dinner plate. Blood does not trickle through a vessel this size. It surges, pushed by a heart powerful enough to move it through a body over 80 feet long. Total blood volume backs up just how much fluid this system handles. A blue whale can carry somewhere around 2,600 gallons of blood, enough to fill a small backyard swimming pool. Every drop eventually cycles back through the aorta, funneled through that single massive passage before spreading out again through smaller vessels. Compare that to your own body. An adult human carries around 1.5 gallons of blood total, moved through vessels barely wider than a straw. A blue whale moves enough blood to fill hundreds of bathtubs, through a main artery wide enough to swallow a basketball. Why does size matter so much here? Pressure and distance. Blood pumped from a heart the size of a small car has to travel the length of a bus, reach the very tip of the tail, then make the return trip back. A narrow vessel would create dangerous pressure, like forcing a garden hose worth of water through a drinking straw. A wide aorta spreads that force out, letting blood move without tearing the vessel apart from the inside. Scientists studying beached or deceased blue whales have measured these vessels directly, and the numbers hold up under real inspection. Marine biologists describe stepping inside sections of aorta pulled from a whale carcass, standing inside a blood vessel the way you might stand inside a large drainage pipe. This is not just a curiosity. It explains how a 200-ton animal dives past 1,000 feet, where the entire body must keep functioning under crushing pressure with almost no fresh oxygen. Every organ depends on this internal plumbing working perfectly, every single dive, for decades without failure. Damage to a vessel this size would be catastrophic. A wound to the aorta means uncontrolled blood loss on a scale that could drain a swimming pool in minutes, part of why a well-aimed strike here proves almost instantly fatal. For now, that vessel keeps doing its job, invisible beneath blubber and muscle, moving enough blood every minute to fill a bathtub twice over. And it is not the only organ inside this animal that breaks every scale you thought you understood. Something else, sitting just behind that massive heart, outweighs an animal you already picture as enormous. A tongue slides forward inside a mouth big enough to swallow a school bus worth of water in a single gulp, and this tongue alone can weigh close to 4 tons, roughly matching the weight of a full-grown African elephant. Most tongues exist to taste and swallow small amounts of food. A blue whale's tongue exists to move an entire small lake of water again and again, every single feeding dive. Feeding starts with speed and force. A blue whale spots a dense cloud of krill, tiny shrimp-like creatures barely bigger than a paperclip, and launches into a lunge. Its jaw drops open, throat pleats expand like an accordion stretching wide, and the whale's entire mouth balloons outward, gulping in a volume of water that can weigh more than the whale itself. Now the tongue goes to work. It presses upward, pushing that massive gulp of seawater back out through rows of baleen, stiff bristle like plates hanging from the upper jaw instead of teeth. Water escapes through the gaps. Krill do not. Thousands of them stay trapped, caught by a filter built from the same material as human fingernails. Recent research using tags and drones rewrote old assumptions completely. Earlier estimates guessed a blue whale ate a few tons of krill a day. Updated tracking now suggests a whale can eat up to 16 tons of krill in a single day during peak feeding season, enough tiny shrimp to fill several dump trucks. just to fuel one day of swimming, diving, and growing. None of this works without a tongue heavy enough and strong enough to survive the force involved. Water rushing into an open mouth at speed creates massive pressure, and a lighter, weaker tongue would simply get shredded or crushed under the strain. Instead, this tongue acts like a built-in piston engineered by evolution to survive thousands of lunges across a single feeding season. Watch a lunge in slow motion, captured by drone footage in recent years, and the whole process looks almost violent. The throat balloons wider than the rest of the body. The jaw stretches to an angle that looks close to breaking. Then, in seconds, the tongue forces the water back out, and the whale swallows what remains, sliding the catch down a throat barely wide enough for a grapefruit to pass through, despite the size of everything else involved. That narrow throat, paired with a tongue the size of an elephant, tells a strange story. Every part of a blue whale exists at a scale built for enormous intake and enormous force, except the one passage that finally lets food through. Somewhere out past the feeding grounds, another part of this animal is about to prove even more powerful than its tongue, its heart, or its bones combined. This one you cannot see. You can only hear it from farther away than seems possible. Somewhere in the deep ocean, an animal opens its mouth and produces a sound louder than a jet engine at takeoff, loud enough to qualify as the most powerful sound any living creature has ever made. That animal is the blue whale. Its calls can reach around 188 decibels, measured underwater. A jet engine roaring during takeoff hits around 140 decibels in air. Underwater sound and air sound do not measure exactly the same way, but even accounting for that difference, researchers still rank the blue whale call as the loudest sound produced by any animal on Earth. Most of the sound sits below what human ears can even detect. Blue whales communicate using infrasound, frequencies so low they fall beneath the range of normal hearing. You would not hear this call as a note or word. You would feel it, a deep pressure moving through water, through your chest, through anything solid nearby. Why does a 200-ton animal need a sound this powerful? Distance. The ocean is enormous, dark, and mostly empty, and a blue whale often needs to find another whale that might be hundreds of miles away. A quiet call gets swallowed by distance and noise. A call this powerful has a real chance of actually being heard. Water helps carry that message further than you might expect. Sound moves about 4 times faster through water than through air, and deep ocean layers create something scientists call the SOFAR channel, a natural pathway that traps and carries low-frequency sound across huge distances with very little loss. A call that would fade out after a mile in open air can travel far past that underwater, bent and guided by pressure and temperature layers acting almost like a tunnel. Some researchers estimate that under the right conditions, a blue whale call could theoretically be detected across an entire ocean basin, hundreds of miles from where it started. Picture shouting from one end of a country and somehow being heard clearly at the other end. That is roughly the scale being discussed here. Not every call reaches that far in practice. Noise from ships, storms, and other ocean sound interferes constantly, and modern shipping traffic has made the ocean far noisier than it was a century ago. Scientists tracking whale calls have noticed communication ranges shrinking over recent decades as engine noise crowds out the same channels whales depend on to find each other. Still, when conditions align, a call this powerful becomes almost impossible to ignore for humans and other ocean animals alike. Underwater microphones placed far from any whale have picked up these calls clearly, confirming just how far a single voice can travel through the right water conditions. If one call can cross an entire ocean basin, what happens when two whales, separated by hundreds of miles, both start calling at once, searching for each other across water too vast for a human mind to picture clearly? A military listening network built to track enemy submarines during the Cold War ended up doing something nobody originally intended. proving that a single blue whale call really can be heard hundreds of miles from where it started. That network is called SOSUS, a chain of underwater microphones the United States Navy placed across the ocean floor decades ago. Once some of that data became available to scientists, researchers realized these sensitive microphones were also picking up something else entirely: the deep, powerful calls of blue whales, recorded clearly from enormous distances. Using this network, scientists tracked individual whale calls and found some could be detected roughly 1,000 miles from the whale making them, depending on ocean conditions and background noise. That distance is close to the length of the entire coastline of California. One sound, produced by one animal, reaching a microphone that far away. This discovery changed how scientists understood blue whale behavior entirely. For years, nobody knew exactly how these animals, often traveling alone across vast stretches of open ocean, managed to find each other for mating or migration. A call capable of crossing hundreds of miles solved a mystery that had puzzled researchers for decades. Male blue whales appear to rely on this, especially during mating season. Long, low-frequency calls, repeated in patterns, may act almost like a broadcast signal, letting a male announce his presence across a huge stretch of ocean rather than searching blindly through empty water. A female picking up that signal from far away could adjust her path toward him, guided by sound alone through total darkness. Not every call serves the same purpose. Scientists have identified different call types, some linked to feeding areas, some tied to migration timing, and some believed to support long-distance contact between whales that may not meet face-to-face for weeks or months. Exact meanings behind each call type remain an active area of research, but the basic power behind them is no longer in question. Modern tracking has only strengthened this picture. Underwater microphones placed in specific ocean basins have recorded matching calls at multiple stations spread hundreds of miles apart, confirming a single whale's voice moving through the SOFA channel, arriving at listening posts far beyond where a human observer would ever expect to hear anything at all. Think about standing in one city and being heard clearly by someone standing several states away, with nothing but open air carrying your voice. That is close to what a blue whale accomplishes underwater, using nothing but a body built to generate pressure waves powerful enough to survive a journey no human voice could ever attempt. All that power, all that range, exists purely for communication. It has never once been used as a weapon, but somewhere beneath the surface, a very different kind of encounter is about to test whether size and sound are enough to keep this animal safe from something with teeth. A shark drifts close to a diving blue whale, drawn in by the scent of krill scattered through the water, and within seconds, that decision becomes the most dangerous one it has made all day. Blue whales do not hunt sharks. Their diet is built entirely around krill, filtered through baleen plates, never meat torn from prey. But close proximity to an animal this massive carries danger that has nothing to do with hunting at all. A blue whale in motion generates forces powerful enough to injure or kill almost anything caught too close, purely as a side effect of moving its own body. Picture the physics involved. A single stroke of its tail can generate enormous thrust, enough to propel 200 tons of whale forward through resistant water in an instant. A shark caught within range of that stroke risks a direct hit, and the sheer weight and speed behind it can easily crack bone or rupture organs, even without any intent to attack. Turbulence adds another layer of risk. A lunge-feeding blue whale creates a massive pressure wave as its mouth balloons open, pulling in tons of water within seconds. Anything caught in that inrush, including a shark chasing the same krill cloud, risks getting dragged along with the current, disoriented and thrown off balance in water suddenly rushing in one direction. Marine biologists studying feeding behavior have observed smaller animals scattering the moment a blue whale begins its lunge, an instinct built from generations of near misses. Sharks, despite sitting near the top of most ocean food chains, show the same reaction. Proximity to a feeding blue whale offers no reward worth the risk, and evolution appears to have wired that lesson deep into shark behavior. Collisions, even accidental ones, rarely end well for the smaller animal. A shark's body, built for speed and precision, strikes against prey its own size, has no defense against a random impact from something the size of a building. There is no negotiating with an animal that outweighs you by thousands of times, especially one that may not even register the collision at all. This imbalance explains a pattern researchers have noted in areas where blue whales feed heavily. Shark activity tends to thin out nearby during active feeding periods, then return once the whale moves on. It is less a retreat from danger and more an instinct to avoid unnecessary risk, the same way you might step back from a construction site rather than risk standing beneath something heavy swinging overhead. None of this makes a blue whale aggressive, it makes it something rarer, an animal so overwhelming in scale that danger surrounds it without effort or intention. A shark does not need to be hunted to end up hurt. It just needs to be nearby at the wrong moment. Sharks are not the only ocean hunters that seem to understand this risk instinctively. Even one of the most feared predators in the entire ocean appears to know exactly when to turn away. Tagging data from great white sharks tracked along known feeding grounds reveals a pattern that surprised researchers watching the numbers scroll in. These sharks, some of the most feared hunters in the entire ocean, consistently steer wide around the largest whales sharing their waters. Great white sharks are apex predators everywhere they swim, capable of taking down seals, sea lions, and even other sharks without hesitation. Yet tracking studies following tag sharks near blue whale feeding grounds show a repeated pattern of course changes whenever paths come close to crossing with a much larger whale nearby. Researchers point to a few likely explanations. Blue whales pose no direct threat as predators since sharks are not part of their diet. The danger instead comes from proximity itself, the same crushing risk discussed with smaller sharks earlier. A 90-foot animal moving through water generates enough displaced current and pressure that even an apex predator has strong reason to keep its distance. Sensory systems may play a role too. Sharks detect electrical signals and vibrations in water using specialized organs along their skin, sensitive enough to pick up the faint electrical pulse of a heartbeat from a hidden prey animal buried in sand. That same sensitivity likely makes the movement of a 200-ton whale impossible to miss from a significant distance, giving a shark plenty of warning to change course long before any direct encounter happens. Sound may add another layer of warning. Blue whale calls, discussed earlier for their record-breaking power, carry easily through water sharks are swimming in, and low-frequency vibrations from a nearby whale's movement likely register clearly through a shark's lateral line. The sensory strip running along its body, built to detect pressure changes in water. None of this means great white sharks are frightened in the way a smaller animal might be. Their course changes look less like panic and more like calculation, the same instinct that leads any smart hunter to avoid a fight that offers no reward and real risk. A shark gains nothing from swimming near a blue whale and risks a great deal, so evolution appears to have shaped a simple rule: steer around it. This pattern fits into a larger picture researchers are only beginning to map out fully. Ocean predators, even the most dangerous ones, seem to organize their movement partly around where the largest animals happen to be, adjusting paths the way a driver might avoid a lane blocked by a slow-moving truck rather than risk a collision. For a blue whale, none of this caution requires any effort at all. It does not chase sharks away. It does not defend territory. Its sheer physical presence does the work automatically, rearranging the movement of animals around it just by existing in the same stretch of ocean. Size and unintentional danger only explain part of the story. Somewhere beneath all that blubber sits a defense built specifically to stop teeth before they ever break through. Peel back the outer layer of a blue whale, and you find something closer to armor plating than ordinary skin, built thick enough to make most bites bounce off without ever breaking through. A blue whale's skin measures around 1 inch thick across most of its body, more than 20 times thicker than the skin covering your own arm. That thickness alone changes the entire equation for any predator hoping to bite through it. Teeth that could easily tear into a seal or a smaller whale suddenly face a barrier built specifically to resist exactly that kind of attack. Skin is only the first layer. Beneath it sits a layer of blubber that can stretch anywhere from 4 to 12 inches deep, depending on the season and the whale's location. This is not simple fat sitting under skin the way it might in a smaller mammal. Blue whale blubber is dense, fibrous, and packed with connective tissue, built more like a shock-absorbing cushion than the soft fat most people picture. Together, skin and blubber can add up to over a foot of combined material protecting the muscle and organs underneath. Picture a mattress strapped around an entire body, thick enough to absorb impact, resist puncture, and insulate against freezing polar water all at the same time. Teeth still matter here, and this is not a total shield. Orcas hunting in coordinated groups have been documented biting into young or weakened blue whales in rare recorded attacks, proving that with enough force and the right target, this armor can eventually be breached. But a single bite rarely accomplishes much against skin and blubber this thick, especially against a healthy adult in open water able to dive, twist, or strike back. Compare this to a shark bite against a seal. A great white shark can sever a full-grown seal in a single strike, teeth slicing clean through skin, blubber, and bone within seconds. Attempt that same bite against a blue whale, and the outcome looks completely different. Skin this thick resists tearing, blubber underneath absorbs and redistributes force, and a bite that would be instantly fatal to a seal barely breaks the surface here. This protection did not appear by accident. Blue whales evolved this armor over millions of years, shaped by cold ocean environments where insulation mattered just as much as defense. Blubber this thick keeps a whale's massive body warm even in freezing Antarctic waters, a survival tool that happens to double as one of the best natural defenses in the entire ocean. Scientists studying stranded or deceased blue whales have measured this layering directly, cutting through samples to record exact thickness at different points on the body. Areas around the head and back tend to carry the thickest protection, while areas like the flippers and tail stalk run slightly thinner, trading some armor for flexibility needed to swim and steer. This armor is not even the most dangerous part of a blue whale's defense. That title belongs to something at the opposite end of its body entirely. Strip away the predator story for a moment, because a blue whale's blubber layer spends far more time fighting a different enemy entirely. Cold water. Cold enough to kill almost anything else swimming through it. Blue whales migrate between freezing polar feeding grounds and warmer tropical breeding waters, crossing a temperature range that would be fatal to most large mammals without serious protection. Water near Antarctica can sit close to freezing, cold enough to pull heat from a human body within minutes. A blue whale swims through it for weeks at a time, feeding constantly, its core temperature staying steady the entire time. Blubber makes that possible. Unlike fur, which traps warm air and becomes useless once soaked, blubber works as a continuous insulating layer, keeping heat locked inside a whale's core, no matter how cold or how deep the surrounding water gets. Blood vessels running through this layer can constrict, reducing heat loss even further during the coldest stretches of a dive. This insulation faces a second challenge most people never consider: pressure. A blue whale diving several hundred feet down experiences pressure many times greater than at the surface, enough to crush a human chest without proper protection. Blubber, dense and slightly compressible, helps the body handle these pressure swings without damage, working alongside a flexible rib cage built to bend rather than break under load. There's a third job blubber handles, one that has nothing to do with cold or pressure at all: storing energy. Blue whales do not feed year round. During long migrations, some individuals travel for months through waters with little to no krill available, relying almost entirely on stored fat to survive the journey. A thick blubber layer becomes a fuel tank, slowly burned down over weeks of travel until the whale reaches feeding grounds rich enough to refill it. Scientists tracking whale body condition across a full year have recorded this cycle clearly. Blubber thickness peaks after a long feeding season, then gradually thins across a migration and breeding period where little or no food gets consumed. A whale that leaves feeding grounds well fed can lose a significant portion of its body fat by the time it returns, blubber quite literally converting into the energy needed to swim thousands of miles. This triple role, insulation, pressure protection, and fuel storage, explains why blubber thickness varies so much across a whale's body and across the seasons. Nature adjusted this system over millions of years, balancing exactly how much blubber a whale needs against how much weight it can afford to carry. None of this shows up when you picture a whale swimming calmly through open water. Underneath that calm surface, blubber is constantly working, trapping heat, cushioning pressure, and quietly converting itself into the fuel, powering a journey longer than most people will travel in their entire lives. Warmth and fuel only handle half the survival equation. When danger actually arrives close enough to matter, a blue whale has one more weapon left, and it delivers force that few animals in the ocean can survive standing near. A single strike from a blue whale's tail carries enough force, by some scientific estimates, to shatter bone, crush cartilage, and end a fight before it even properly begins. The tail fluke itself measures around 12 feet across, wider than a small car parked sideways. Built from dense muscle and connective tissue rather than bone, this fluke acts like a massive paddle, capable of driving 200 tons of whale forward through resistant seawater with a single powerful stroke. Researchers who study the mechanics of whale movement estimate that a full force tail strike can generate several tons of pressure at the point of impact. Numbers vary depending on the whale size and the strike speed, but every estimate lands in the same general territory: force capable of causing severe, often fatal injury to almost anything caught directly beneath it. Boats offer a real-world example of what this force can do. Vessel strikes involving large whales, while usually accidental and initiated by the boat rather than the whale, have resulted in serious hull damage in documented cases, cracked fiberglass, and bent metal from contact with the body moving at speed. If unintentional contact can do that kind of damage to a boat, a deliberate targeted strike aimed at a smaller predator carries even greater destructive potential. Compare this to force generated by other large animals. An elephant's kick, often cited as one of the most powerful strikes in the animal kingdom, delivers serious but survivable force to most threats. A blue whale tail strike operates on an entirely different scale, backed by a body weighing roughly 30 times more than that elephant, moving through water with the help of tail muscles built for generating thrust across an entire lifetime of swimming. Speed matters just as much as size here. A tail fluke does not need to move quickly to generate serious force, given the sheer mass behind it, but a whale using this stroke defensively, rather than simply swimming, can snap the tail down with surprising speed and precision. Footage of whales fending off harassing predators shows controlled, deliberate strikes rather than random thrashing, suggesting a level of accuracy behind the movement. This defensive capability likely plays a role in keeping most predators cautious in the first place. An orca or shark considering an attack has to weigh the risk of a single well-placed tail strike against any potential reward, and given the injuries such a strike could cause, the math rarely favors the predator, especially against a healthy, alert adult blue whale capable of sensing and responding to a threat. Even calves, still building strength and coordination, carry tail muscles capable of a meaningful strike long before they reach full adult size. This early defensive capability may help explain why predators targeting blue whale calves tend to rely on coordinated group tactics rather than solo attacks, a strategy that becomes necessary specifically because a single attacker facing an angry tail alone rarely walks away unharmed. One question remains at the center of all this. Has a tail strike this powerful ever actually been documented hitting one of the ocean's other top predators directly? And if so, what happened next? Marine biologists studying orcapods that specialize in hunting large whales have documented something worth sitting with. Many of these orcas carry scars, and the pattern of those scars raises real questions about how they got them. A single tail slap from a blue whale, delivered with the force described earlier, could plausibly break ribs, damage internal organs, or cause severe bruising to an orca caught within striking range. Orcas are powerful, intelligent hunters, but they are still built at a fraction of a blue whale's size and mass, roughly 1/30th in most cases, and a direct hit from an animal that much larger carries real risk. Documented attacks on blue whales by orcas remain rare, which makes each recorded case valuable to researchers piecing together how these encounters actually unfold. In cases where hunts have been observed and filmed, attacking orcas tend to approach carefully, taking turns and watching the target's movement rather than rushing in together all at once. This cautious approach lines up with what a tail capable of serious injury would demand from any predator smart enough to respect it. Some marine biologists studying scar patterns on orcas known to target large whales have proposed that certain injuries could be linked to close encounters with prey defending themselves, potentially including tail strikes. Confirming an exact cause behind any single scar remains difficult, since injuries could come from several sources, including encounters with other orcas or unrelated accidents. Still, the pattern fits closely enough with expected tail strike injuries that many researchers consider it a strong possibility worth continued study. Group hunting strategy offers another clue. Orcas hunting large whales rarely attempt a solo attack, instead working in coordinated pods that take turns wearing down a target over an extended chase, sometimes lasting hours. This kind of extended, careful strategy makes far more sense against prey capable of fighting back seriously than it would against something defenseless. Video evidence from rare documented attacks shows orcas positioning themselves specifically to avoid a blue whale's tail, often approaching from the front or the sides rather than directly behind. This positioning looks deliberate, the kind of adjustment a smart predator makes after learning that the back half of this animal is not somewhere you want to be caught. Taken together, the evidence points toward a consistent picture. Orcas treat blue whale tails as a genuine threat worth avoiding, not simply an obstacle to work around. Whether every scar on every orca traces back to a tail strike specifically may never be confirmed with total certainty, but the caution built into every observed attack suggests these predators already know something about the risk. That caution explains part of why full-grown blue whales rarely face serious predator attacks, but it does not explain everything. Even the most confident, coordinated orcapod appears to hold back from certain kinds of attacks entirely, choosing their moments with a precision that suggests something deeper than simple caution. Killer whales hunting a blue whale never work alone, and the reason comes down to a simple, brutal kind of math every experienced predator eventually learns. Some prey is only worth attacking as a team, and even then, only under the right conditions. Not every orca hunts large whales. Different orca populations specialize in very different diets, some focused entirely on fish, others on seals, and a smaller number specifically known for targeting large whales, including blue whales on rare occasions. These whale hunting orcas tend to travel and hunt in tight, coordinated pods, often built around related family members who have hunted together for years. Group hunting spreads out both the risk and the workload. A single orca attempting to take down a blue whale alone would face the full force of that tail strike discussed earlier, with no backup and no way to retreat safely if things went wrong. A coordinated pod can take turns approaching, drawing a target's attention, then retreating while another orca moves in from a different angle, spreading the danger across multiple animals rather than concentrating it on one. Even with a full pod involved, these attacks remain rare events, not routine hunting behavior. Scientists studying orca diet patterns note that large whale hunts require enormous energy investment, sometimes stretching across hours of chasing, positioning, and repeated attempts. Compare that to hunting a seal, which might take minutes with far less risk involved, and the appeal of targeting a blue whale specifically starts looking a lot less obvious from a pure energy standpoint. Target selection appears highly specific in the rare cases that have been documented. Healthy, full-grown blue whales rarely appear in confirmed attack accounts. Calves, weakened individuals, or whales isolated from the relative safety of deeper, more open water show up far more often as targets, suggesting orcas assess vulnerability carefully before committing to an attack this demanding. Location and circumstance seem to matter as well. Some documented attacks have occurred in areas where blue whales' usual escape routes, deep water and open ocean space, were somehow limited, forcing a whale into shallower or more confined water where a pod could work more effectively. Open ocean, by contrast, favors the blue whale, offering room to dive, maneuver, and use that tail without a pod easily surrounding it from every side. All of this points toward a hunting strategy built entirely around opportunity rather than routine. Orcas capable of taking on a blue whale appear to wait for specific, favorable conditions: a vulnerable target, a pod large enough to spread the risk, and a location that limits the whale's usual advantages. This selective, cautious approach explains why, for decades, scientists suspected orca attacks on blue whales happened, but had almost no direct evidence to study. Reports came from scarred survivors and second-hand accounts, never an actual recorded hunt from start to finish. That changed only recently, when a research team finally captured something no one had ever managed to film before. For decades, marine biologists believed orcas occasionally killed blue whales but lacked a single confirmed filmed account to prove it. That gap closed off the coast of Western Australia, in an area called Bremer Canyon, when a research team finally captured exactly what this kind of attack looks like from start to finish. Bremer Canyon sits along a stretch of deep water known for unusually high orca activity, drawing researchers who spent entire seasons tracking pods and documenting behavior. During one of these research trips, a team spotted something they had never managed to properly witness before: a coordinated group of orcas actively engaging with a blue whale in open water. What followed stretched across hours rather than minutes. Orcas took turns approaching the whale, some biting at the tail and flippers, while others worked to prevent it from diving to safety. A coordinated pattern that matched exactly what researchers had theorized about pack hunting strategy for years without direct proof. The blue whale, despite its size and the tail strike capability discussed earlier, faced a level of sustained, coordinated pressure that proved impossible to fully escape. Researchers aboard the observation vessel described the sheer scale of the encounter as difficult to process in real time: an animal larger than anything else in the water surrounded by attackers, a fraction of its size, each one playing a specific role in a hunt that had clearly been refined over generations, even without this exact target ever being documented before. The attack ultimately succeeded, ending in the blue whale's death, an outcome that confirmed something researchers had long suspected but had never been able to prove with direct observation. This was not a case of orcas harassing or testing a whale and then giving up. It was a complete successful hunt, carried out against what many had assumed was one of the ocean's most secure animals. Scientific reaction to the footage and reports was immediate. Papers describing the observation moved through peer review and publication, treated as a landmark record in marine biology. The first properly documented case confirming that orcas can and do successfully hunt full-grown blue whales under the right conditions. This single event reshaped assumptions across the field. If a healthy adult blue whale could be brought down by a coordinated pod under the right circumstances, the idea that size alone guarantees safety needed serious reconsideration. Blue whales remained and remain extraordinarily difficult targets, but difficult is not the same as impossible, and this attack proved exactly where that line sits. Questions immediately followed the discovery. How often does this actually happen, hidden from human observation across the vast majority of the world's oceans? Was this attack typical, or did specific unusual circumstances make it possible? And perhaps most pressing of all, why had it taken so long? Decades of study and thousands of hours on the water for anyone to catch this on camera at all. Catching a wild orca attack on a blue whale on camera required more than skill or persistence. It required an almost impossible stroke of luck, 3 separate factors lining up at once in a place where most of the ocean offers no cameras, no observers, and no chance of ever knowing what happened. Start with simple math. Blue whale populations remain a small fraction of what they once were, spread thin across enormous stretches of open ocean. Orcas capable of and willing to hunt large whales represent an even smaller, more specialized subset of the overall killer whale population. Multiply these tiny probabilities together, a rare predator meeting a rare prey animal in exactly the right conditions to attempt a hunt, and the odds of any single encounter happening at all shrink dramatically. Now add the requirement that this encounter needs to happen somewhere a research vessel or observer happens to be present at the exact right moment, with equipment ready to document it. The ocean covers roughly 70% of Earth's surface, and only a tiny fraction of that area gets any kind of consistent scientific observation. Most of the planet's deep water sees no boats, no drones, and no cameras for months or years at a stretch. Blue whale behavior itself adds another layer of difficulty. These animals spend much of their lives in deep, open water far from coastlines, diving for extended periods and covering huge distances during migration. Even researchers specifically studying blue whales often struggle to locate and track individuals consistently, let alone happen to be present during one of the rarest and most dramatic events in the species' entire life history. Orca hunting groups add their own unpredictability. Pods capable of targeting large whales do not announce their intentions in advance, and attacks appear to happen opportunistically, triggered by specific conditions researchers are still working to fully understand. There's no way to simply wait in the right spot, since nobody fully knows what the right spot even looks like until after an attack has already happened. Bremer Canyon itself offered a rare advantage, a location with consistently high orca activity, drawing dedicated research teams who spent entire seasons on the water specifically to study these animals. Even with that concentrated long-term effort, catching this particular kind of attack still came down to being in exactly the right place during a narrow window of time that nobody could have predicted or scheduled in advance. Technology played a smaller but real role as well. High-quality cameras, drones, and observation equipment capable of capturing and preserving footage across an entire multi-hour encounter have only become widely accessible to research teams in recent years. Put all of these factors together: rarity, vast unobserved ocean space, unpredictable timing, and only recently available technology, and this footage looks less like an inevitable discovery and more like a nearly impossible needle finally found in an ocean-sized haystack. That same vast, hard-to-observe habitat that hid this event for so long also plays a critical role in something else entirely: how a mother blue whale manages to protect a calf against exactly this kind of threat. A mother blue whale swimming beside her calf through open water carries a defensive instinct that researchers are only beginning to understand fully, built around one central strategy: never let distance open up between her body and her calves. Calves face far greater danger than adult blue whales. They lack the full blubber protection discussed earlier. Their swimming stamina remains limited compared to a full grown adult, and their inexperience in open water makes them easier targets for a coordinated hunting pod looking for the safest possible opportunity. A mother's presence and positioning become the single most important defense a calf has against this kind of threat. Observations of mother and calf pairs, along with research drawn from related baleen whale species where maternal defense has been studied more closely, point toward a consistent pattern. Mothers tend to swim close beside or slightly behind a calf, positioning their own massive body between the calf and any approaching threat. This placement forces an attacking predator to get past the mother first, exposing itself to exactly the kind of tail strike capable of serious injury discussed earlier. Speed and stamina work differently for a mother protecting a calf compared to a mother swimming alone. Calves cannot yet match an adult's full diving depth or sustained swimming speed, which limits how far and how fast a pair can retreat from danger. This forces mothers to rely more heavily on active defense rather than simple escape, standing ground and using body positioning and tail strikes rather than attempting to outrun a hunting pod entirely. Vocal communication likely plays a role as well. The powerful, long-distance calls discussed earlier may allow a mother to signal distress, though direct evidence of other blue whales responding to defend an unrelated calf remains limited. What does appear more consistent, drawn from related whale species, is a mother's willingness to physically place herself at greater risk specifically to protect her calf, absorbing potential attacks rather than allowing them to reach the smaller, more vulnerable body swimming beside her. Location choices earlier in a calf's life may also serve a protective purpose. Recall that mothers often give birth and nurse calves in warmer, more sheltered waters, partly to avoid the colder feeding grounds where whale hunting orcapods are more commonly active. This timing buys crucial months of growth before a calf ever needs to face the more dangerous open water crossing that comes later, when it will finally be large and strong enough to offer some direct defense of its own. None of this guarantees safety. The documented attack described earlier stands as clear evidence that even a coordinated, determined defense does not always succeed against a large, persistent hunting pod, but the strategy itself, close positioning, active defense, careful timing, and reliance on raw physical power, gives a calf its best possible chance during the most dangerous stretch of its early life. Every one of these defenses, size, armor, force, sound, and now maternal protection, exist because something else in the ocean was once willing to test them directly. Nothing tested them more than the predator that arrived centuries ago carrying not teeth, but harpoons. A blue whale calf can survive years of open ocean, orcapods, and freezing migration routes, and still face its single greatest danger from something with no teeth, no fins, and no interest in eating it at all: a passing ship. Every threat covered so far, sharks, orcas, turbulence, and cold, come from nature, shaped over millions of years into a rough balance a young whale can actually survive. Ship strikes follow no such balance. A cargo vessel moving through a shipping lane has no evolved instinct to avoid a whale resting or feeding near the surface, and a calf, still learning how to navigate open water safely, has no evolved instinct built specifically to avoid a 200-foot steel hull moving far faster than any predator it has ever faced. Researchers tracking whale mortality along major shipping routes have found vessel strikes rank among the leading recorded causes of death for large whales in several well-studied regions, sometimes surpassing every natural cause combined. A calf traveling close beside its mother through a busy coastal corridor faces exposure to this risk during some of the most vulnerable months of its life. precisely when it should be focused on growing rather than dodging traffic it has no way of understanding. Fishing gear presents a second, quieter danger. Ropes and nets set for entirely different species can tangle around a young whale's tail or flippers, and unlike a predator's bite, this kind of injury does not end quickly. An entangled whale can drag gear for months, exhausted, unable to feed properly, sometimes surviving just long enough for researchers to document the slow toll it takes. Neither of these dangers announces itself the way a predator does. There's no chase, no bite, no obvious struggle a mother can see coming and respond to with the defenses covered earlier in this story. A ship simply arrives, moving on a path that has nothing to do with the whale at all, and a calf built to sense pressure changes from a hunting orcapod hundreds of yards away has no comparable warning system for a hull cutting through the water above it. This shift matters because it breaks the pattern this entire story has followed so far. Every advantage described up to this point, armor thick enough to stop teeth, a tail powerful enough to break bone, a heart built to survive extremes, evolved specifically to answer threats built by nature. None of it evolved to answer a threat that showed up only in the last couple of centuries, moving faster and more silently than anything a blue whale ever had reason to fear before. Scientists studying modern whale mortality increasingly describe this gap directly. An animal nearly untouchable by every predator nature ever produced, now facing a danger its entire evolutionary history never prepared it for. That gap sits at the center of a much bigger story this whale's history is about to walk straight into. Before reaching that story, it is worth understanding just how effective nature's original defenses really are, starting with a hunting problem every predator alive still cannot solve. How do you ambush an animal built to disappear straight down? Ambush hunting depends on one simple advantage: surprise. A predator hides, waits, and strikes before its target has any chance to react. Against a blue whale, that entire strategy runs into a problem most hunters never have to solve, because this animal controls the one direction ambush usually depends on most: straight down. Most ambush predators rely on cover, a reef, a rock ledge, murky water, or darkness to close the distance unseen. Open ocean strips almost all of that away. There are no walls to hide behind, no coral to crouch beside, nothing but water in every direction for miles. A predator hoping to surprise a blue whale has to somehow close that distance across open water, where sound and pressure changes travel fast and far, and this whale has already been shown to detect and produce exactly those kinds of signals better than almost anything else alive. Diving adds another layer of protection. A blue whale chooses when to descend, how deep to go, and how long to stay down, shifting the entire encounter onto its own terms rather than a predator's. An orcapod planning an attack cannot simply wait at a fixed ambush point because the whale is never required to pass through the same stretch of water twice. Depth itself becomes a moving target, unpredictable in timing and unpredictable in route. Sensory advantage plays a major role here too. A blue whale's hearing, tuned to detect the same low frequency signals discussed earlier in this story, likely picks up the movement of approaching predators from a significant distance, long before an attacker gets anywhere close to striking range. This gives the whale time to change depth, change direction, or simply outlast an approach that a slower, less aware animal would never notice coming. Physiology backs up every one of these advantages. The heart rate control covered earlier lets a blue whale extend dives well beyond what most predators can match, turning a simple descent into an escape route no pursuing animal can follow indefinitely. An orca chasing a diving blue whale eventually has to surface for air far sooner than the whale itself does, breaking off pursuit simply because its own body demands it. Even coordinated group hunts run into this problem. A pod capable of surrounding a whale near the surface loses most of that advantage the moment the target dives. since maintaining a tight formation gets far harder in three-dimensional open water than it does near a fixed surface target. Depth scatters an attack the way running into a crowd might scatter pursuers chasing someone on foot. None of this makes a blue whale invisible or untouchable. It simply removes the single tool ambush predators rely on most: predictability. A whale that can vanish downward on its own schedule, sense danger from a distance, and outlast pursuit through sheer physiological control leaves very little room for surprise, the one ingredient almost every successful ambush actually requires. That raises an obvious question about exactly how far down this escape route actually goes, and what, if anything, is waiting for a blue whale once it disappears into water dark enough that no predator and no human can easily follow. Push a blue whale down past 1,000 feet, and the ocean round it turns into a place almost nothing survives casually. Crushing pressure, total darkness, and a scattering of strange, half-seen shapes drifting through water where sunlight has never once reached. Tracking data collected from tagged blue whales shows dives regularly reaching several 100 feet during normal feeding, with recorded dives pushing past 1,000 feet under the right conditions. At that depth, pressure builds to a level that would collapse an unprotected human chest almost instantly, yet a blue whale's flexible ribcage and dense blubber, covered earlier in this story, allow its entire body to bend safely under weight that would crush far smaller, more rigid structures. Light disappears fast on the way down. Within the first few 100 feet, color starts vanishing, red tones fading first until only a dim blue-gray glow remains. Push further, and even that fades completely, leaving total darkness broken only by the occasional flash of bioluminescent light from creatures built specifically to survive without sunlight at all. This is not empty water. Deep scattering layers, dense clouds of small fish, squid, and krill rise and fall through the water column daily, and blue whales appear to time many of their deepest dives to intercept exactly these layers, chasing concentrated pockets of food into water most surface animals never bother following. Stranger animals share this space. Giant squid, rarely seen alive by humans, patrol some of the same depth, along with deep diving sperm whales capable of descending even further than a blue whale typically travels. Encounters between these species remain almost entirely undocumented, hidden by darkness and distance from any camera or observer, leaving scientists to piece together this world mostly through indirect evidence rather than direct observation. Time matters as much as depth. A blue whale can hold a dive for 20 minutes or longer, powered by that slowed, controlled heartbeat discussed earlier, oxygen rationed carefully across muscles and organs built specifically to function on a fraction of what they would need at the surface. Most animals sharing this depth cannot match that endurance, giving a diving blue whale a window of time down here that few pursuers, predator or otherwise, could ever hope to match. Returning to the surface carries its own risk, a careful, controlled ascent that avoids the kind of rapid pressure change that causes serious injury in less specialized divers. A blue whale manages this transition without decompression sickness, using biological adaptation still not fully understood even by researchers who have studied this species for decades. All of this turns deep water into something closer to a second home than a hiding spot, an entire hidden world a blue whale can access freely while almost nothing else nearby can follow for long. Down here, in crushing darkness far from any predator built to survive that pressure, a blue whale finds something it can never quite find at the surface: real, uncontested peace, in a world with nowhere obvious to hide, yet somehow completely alone. A clownfish disappears into a sea anemone the moment danger passes by. An octopus melts into a crack in the reef, invisible within seconds. A blue whale has no equivalent option anywhere in its life. In open water, there's no cave, no ledge, no coral wall to duck behind, only water stretching in every direction for hundreds of miles. This absence of shelter shapes nearly everything about how a blue whale survives. Every defense covered so far: thick skin, a powerful tail, controlled deep dives, a heart built for extremes, exists specifically because hiding was never an option to begin with. Evolution could not build a blue whale a hiding spot, so instead it built an animal that rarely needs one. Some camouflage does exist, subtle rather than complete. A blue whale's blue-gray coloring works as a form of counter-shading, darker along the top of its body and lighter underneath. Seen from above, that dark back blends into deep water shadows. Seen from below, against sunlight filtering down from the surface, the lighter belly helps break up its outline. This will not fool a determined predator up close, but at a distance, in open water with no other cover available, it offers a small edge that adds up across a lifetime of near misses. Movement itself replaces hiding as a survival strategy. A blue whale rarely stays in one stretch of ocean for long, following seasonal feeding patterns and migration routes that shift constantly across months and years. A predator cannot simply learn one whale's hiding spot the way it might learn a den or a burrow, because there is no fixed location to learn. The entire ocean becomes the whale's territory, too vast for any single predator to monitor completely. Group behavior offers little help here either, since blue whales generally travel alone or in loose, temporary pairs rather than large, defensible pods. Unlike prey animals that rely on numbers, surrounding a vulnerable member with a protective crowd, a blue whale mostly faces open water encounters as an individual, relying entirely on its own physical defenses rather than backup from others nearby. This total lack of shelter explains why so many of this animal's traits lean toward raw physical capability rather than concealment. Armor thick enough to resist bites replaces a shell to hide inside. A call powerful enough to cross an ocean replaces a burrow to retreat into. Depth itself, rather than any physical structure, becomes the closest thing to cover this animal will ever have. Compare this to almost any other large animal on Earth. Elephants have herds and open grassland escape routes. Bears have dens. Even other whale species sometimes rely on shallow reefs or ice formations for partial protection during vulnerable moments. A blue whale has none of that, and yet it remains one of the safest large animals in the entire ocean, protected entirely by what its own body can do rather than anywhere it can go to disappear. With nowhere to hide, distance and speed become everything, raising a question worth testing directly. Exactly how fast can an animal this size actually move when its life depends on it? Speed sounds like an obvious answer to danger. Swim faster than whatever wants to hurt you and the problem solves itself. For a blue whale, the real answer turns out to be far more complicated than a simple race. Cruising speed for a blue whale sits around 5 miles an hour most of the time, a relaxed pace built for covering huge migratory distances efficiently rather than winning any race. At that pace, a determined predator built for speed could close the distance without much trouble. An orca, by comparison, can reach bursts near 30 miles an hour when actively hunting, more than fast enough to catch a blue whale moving at its normal, unhurried pace. This gap might suggest a blue whale has no real speed advantage at all. Full sustained sprinting, the kind needed to simply outrun a fast predator over a long chase, is not really this animal's strategy, and matching an orca's top speed for an extended period would burn through energy reserves far faster than a 200-ton body can afford to spend. What a blue whale does have is the ability to match or briefly exceed that speed in short, powerful bursts exactly when a threat gets close enough to matter. Those bursts, covered in more detail shortly, are not meant to win a marathon. They are meant to buy just enough distance and time to reach deeper water, where every advantage already covered, depth, endurance, and darkness, shift the entire encounter back in the whale's favor. Stamina, rather than raw top speed, becomes the real deciding factor. An orca sprinting at full speed cannot sustain that pace for long before needing to slow down and recover. A blue whale using a short burst to reach deep water, then settling into a long, oxygen-efficient dive powered by that slowed heartbeat discussed earlier, can effectively remove itself from a chase entirely, forcing a predator to either give up or wait far longer than most hunts are worth. Body size itself plays into this calculation in an unexpected way. Larger animals generally move more efficiently through water per pound of body weight than smaller animals, even if the absolute top speed is lower. A blue whale moving at cruising speed uses less energy per mile than a smaller predator chasing at a much faster pace, meaning a prolonged pursuit favors the larger animal's endurance over the smaller animal's raw quickness, especially once depth gets added into the equation. As a general defense, especially paired with the other tools already covered in this story, speed becomes less about winning a straightforward race and more about buying just enough time and distance to disappear, using every other advantage this animal has spent millions of years developing. That still leaves one number worth pinning down directly. When a blue whale actually needs to move fast, truly fast, exactly how quickly can 200 tons of muscle and blubber accelerate through open water? When a blue whale truly needs to move, the results defy everything its slow, graceful cruising pace suggests. Researchers tracking panicked or startled blue whales have recorded burst speeds reaching around 20 to 30 miles an hour, a pace that would outrun a car cruising through a typical neighborhood street. That kind of acceleration from an animal weighing as much as 40 school buses combined is not just impressive, it is close to physically absurd. Nothing this size should be able to move this fast through water, this thick with resistance, yet a blue whale manages it using the same enormous tail fluke and muscle system responsible for the crushing strike force covered earlier in the story. Compare this burst speed to something more familiar. A world-class Olympic swimmer among the fastest humans in water tops out around 5 miles an hour. A panicked blue whale can move roughly 6 times faster than that, dragging a body larger than most buildings through open ocean with a level of power that seems to belong to a much smaller, more streamlined animal. This speed does not come free. Pushing 200 tons through water at this pace demands an enormous burst of energy, drawn rapidly from muscles that normally operate at a much more relaxed, efficient pace during regular cruising. A blue whale cannot sustain this speed for long, typically holding a true sprint for only a short stretch before easing back toward a slower, more sustainable pace. That brief window matters enormously in the moment it counts. A short burst at full speed, even lasting only a minute or two, can create real separation between a blue whale and an approaching threat, especially paired with a sudden change in direction or depth that a pursuing predator has to react to and match in real time. Predators built for shorter, more explosive attacks, rather than sustained chases, often lose ground fast once a target this size actually commits to full speed. Body mechanics help explain part of this surprising capability. A tail fluke this large generates enormous thrust with each stroke, and while a blue whale's default swimming style favors slow, steady, energy-conserving strokes, the same muscle system can shift into a much more aggressive, rapid rhythm when the situation demands it, trading efficiency for raw acceleration. Scientists studying these bursts note that they appear almost exclusively during moments of genuine threat or disturbance, rather than during normal feeding or travel. This selective use suggests a blue whale treats top speed as a limited emergency resource, something reserved specifically for the rare moments when every other defense, distance, depth, and size needs backup fast. Put together with everything covered before this point, a clear picture starts to form. A blue whale is not simply big, armored, and loud. It is fast when it needs to be, precise when it strikes, and endlessly capable of disappearing into water almost nothing else can follow. All of which raises an obvious question about why, given every one of these advantages, almost nothing in the ocean bothers trying to eat one in the first place. Bigger usually means more food, and more food should make an animal a better target, not a worse one. For a blue whale, that logic breaks down almost completely, turning the largest possible meal in the ocean into one of the least practical choices any predator could make. Start with basic physics. A single blue whale carries roughly 200 tons of meat and blubber, far beyond what any predator or even a large group of predators could possibly consume in one sitting. A pod of orcas successfully bringing down a blue whale still cannot eat the entire animal before decomposition, and the arrival of scavengers reduce much of that meat to waste. Compare that to a seal, small enough for a single predator to consume entirely in one meal, with nothing wasted and no extended risky pursuit required. Risk versus reward tips heavily against attempting a hunt this large. Every defense covered throughout this story: armor thick enough to resist teeth, a tail capable of breaking bone, speed bursts fast enough to create real separation, adds real danger to any predator attempting an attack. A shark or lone orca injured during a failed hunt gains nothing and risks everything, a trade most predators are simply not built to accept when easier, safer prey remains widely available nearby. Energy economics make the case even clearer. Hunting demands calories spent chasing, positioning, and fighting a target before any reward gets collected. A seal hunt might cost a predator a small amount of energy for a guaranteed, quick payoff. A blue whale hunt could cost hours of sustained effort across an entire coordinated group, with a real chance of ending in failure, injury, or simple exhaustion with nothing to show for it. Digestion adds a less obvious but real complication. Consuming a massive amount of blubber and meat in one extended feeding session places heavy demands on a predator's body, and evidence from documented attacks suggests even successful hunters do not fully consume a downed blue whale before moving on, leaving much of the carcass behind for scavengers rather than finishing what should, in theory, be an enormous nutritional windfall. Availability plays a role as well. Blue whale populations, discussed in more detail shortly, remain relatively low and widely scattered across enormous stretches of ocean, meaning encounters with a viable target happen far less often than encounters with far more common prey, like seals, fish, or smaller marine mammals. A rare, difficult, dangerous meal loses even more appeal when reliable. Safer alternatives are almost always closer and easier to find. All of this adds up to a simple evolutionary outcome. Predators capable of physically overpowering a blue whale exist, but the actual math involved in attempting it rarely favors the attacker. Size alone did not make this animal safe. The complete equation, size combined with danger, low reward, and high risk, did. That equation gets even clearer once the actual energy cost of a real hunting attempt gets calculated directly, using the closest thing to hard evidence science currently has available. Documented attacks on blue whales, still rare enough that each one becomes a genuine scientific event, share one consistent detail. They take hours, not minutes, and that time comes directly out of an orcapod's own energy reserves before a single bite of reward gets collected. A typical orca hunt targeting smaller prey, a seal or a fast-moving fish, often wraps up within minutes, a short, efficient burst of energy followed by an immediate payoff. The documented blue whale attack covered earlier this story stretched across several hours, involving repeated approaches, coordinated positioning, and sustained physical effort from multiple orcas working together the entire time. Every one of those hours carries a real energy cost. Orcas are large, active predators with high metabolic demands of their own, and sustained high-effort swimming, especially the kind involved in repeatedly approaching and retreating from a target capable of a serious tail strike, burns through energy reserves far faster than routine cruising or a quick, successful seal hunt ever would. Researchers studying orca energetics estimate that an extended hunt like this likely demands a significant portion of a pod's daily energy budget, effort that would otherwise go toward finding and consuming several easier, safer meals across that same stretch of time. A pod committing to a multi-hour blue whale hunt is essentially betting an entire day's worth of foraging effort on a single uncertain outcome. Risk compounds this cost further. Every approach toward a defending blue whale carries the injury risk covered earlier, meaning energy spent on this hunt comes bundled with a real chance of a pod member getting hurt badly enough to reduce the group's overall hunting effectiveness for days or weeks afterward. An injured orca cannot hunt at full capacity, turning a single, failed, or costly attack into a lingering setback for the entire group. Even a successful hunt does not fully balance this equation the way a smaller, quicker kill would. The reward, meat and blubber from a downed blue whale, is enormous in raw terms, but as covered earlier, no pod can realistically consume the entire animal before waste and scavengers take a share. The actual usable energy return per hour invested likely falls far short of what the same pod could gather hunting easier prey across that identical stretch of time. This math helps explain why these hunts remain so rare, rather than becoming a regular strategy among whale hunting orca populations. A behavior this costly, risky, and inefficient only makes sense under very specific circumstances. A particularly vulnerable target, favorable positioning, and perhaps limited alternative prey available in that specific stretch of ocean at that specific time. What already seems clear, based on the handful of documented cases available, is that nature rarely finds this trade worthwhile, leaving blue whales facing shockingly little real predation pressure across an entire lifetime that can stretch past 90 years. That single fact leads directly to a conclusion many marine biologists now state plainly, with only one notable exception worth naming. Ask marine biologists to name a natural predator capable of reliably threatening a healthy adult blue whale, and most will eventually land on the same uncomfortable answer. There really is not one, at least not in the way that phrase usually gets used. Then, almost every time, they add a single exception that changes the entire conversation. Everything covered up to this point supports that first conclusion: armor thick enough to blunt teeth, a tail capable of breaking bone in a single strike, a hard and diving system built to outlast almost any pursuer, speed bursts fast enough to create real separation when it matters most, an entire ocean with nowhere to truly hide, matched by an animal that rarely needs to. Even the one confirmed successful attack required a coordinated group, hours of sustained effort, real physical risk, and circumstances rare enough that it took decades of research before anyone managed to document it directly. Put simply, nature spent millions of years testing this animal, and nature mostly lost. Predators capable of physically overpowering a blue whale exist, but the actual cost of attempting it rarely makes sense compared to easier, safer prey available almost everywhere else in the ocean. This is not luck. It is the direct result of an evolutionary arms race that produced an animal almost too expensive to attack. The exception breaks every part of that equation at once. Humans arrived without needing to match a blue whale's speed, without needing to survive a tail strike, and without needing to outdive an animal capable of vanishing into crushing, lightless water for 20 minutes at a time. Technology solved every problem evolution had spent millions of years failing to solve for any natural predator. A rifle-mounted harpoon does not care how thick a blue whale's skin measures. A steam-powered ship does not tire the way an orca pod eventually must. A factory ship anchored offshore does not need to consume an entire carcass in one sitting, solving the waste problem that made every natural predator's math work against attempting a hunt this large in the first place. This shift did not happen gradually, the way most predator prey relationships evolve over generations of small adjustments on both sides. It happened suddenly. Within a span of decades, using tools a blue whale had no evolutionary mechanism to ever adapt against. Every defense covered throughout this story evolved to answer teeth, claws, and coordinated animal behavior. None of it evolved to answer explosive harpoons or steel hulls. Scientists studying this shift often frame it in stark terms: an animal that spent millions of years becoming nearly untouchable by nature, brought closer to extinction within a single century by a predator that never needed to touch it directly at all. The tail strike that could break an orca's ribs meant nothing against a harpoon fired from 100 yards away. That predator has a name, a specific moment when it fully arrived, and a body count that still shapes ocean populations today, more than half a century after the worst of it finally stopped. For most of human history, blue whales stayed almost completely safe from people, not through any special protection, but through simple physical limitation. Wooden sailing ships and hand-thrown harpoons stood no real chance against an animal capable of the speed and power covered throughout this story. That safety ended abruptly in the late 1800s when a Norwegian inventor solved the one problem that had kept blue whales out of reach for centuries. That inventor was Sven Foyn, credited with developing the explosive harpoon cannon, a weapon mounted directly onto the bow of a steam-powered ship. Unlike earlier hand-thrown harpoons, this cannon fired a harpoon tipped with an explosive charge, detonating after impact and killing a whale far faster and more reliably than anything used before. Paired with steam power, fast enough to actually keep pace with a fleeing blue whale, this combination cracked open a hunt that had been effectively impossible for all of human history up to that point. Blue whales became an especially valuable target once this technology existed, precisely because of their size. Every ton of blubber meant more oil, the primary product whalers sought, used at the time for lighting, lubrication, and a range of industrial purposes before petroleum-based alternatives took over. A single blue whale could yield far more oil than smaller whale species, making it one of the most profitable targets available once the technology finally existed to catch one reliably. Factory ships expanded this operation even further. Rather than towing a killed whale back to a distant shore station, these vessels could process an entire whale directly at sea, stripping blubber and rendering oil within hours, then moving immediately toward the next target. This innovation removed one of the last practical limits on whaling operations, allowing fleets to hunt far from any coastline for extended stretches, following whale populations across entire ocean basins. Antarctic waters became a primary hunting ground, home to some of the richest krill feeding grounds blue whales depend on, discussed earlier in this story. The same rich food source that let blue whales grow to record-breaking size also concentrated large numbers of them in predictable seasonal locations, making the hunting operation even more efficient once whaling fleets identified exactly where and when to find them. Competition between whaling nations accelerated the entire operation further. Norway led early development of this technology, but fleets from several other countries quickly adopted similar methods, each competing for a limited and rapidly shrinking population before anyone fully understood how limited that population actually was. There was no coordinated limit, no shared understanding of sustainable numbers, only competing fleets racing to catch as many whales as possible before others got there first. Within a few short decades, an animal that had evaded every natural predator for millions of years found itself facing a hunter it had no evolutionary answer for at all. The numbers that followed remain some of the starkest in the entire history of human interaction with wildlife. a body count large enough to push the largest animal on Earth to the very edge of disappearing completely. Industrial whaling killed an estimated 350,000 blue whales during the 20th century alone, a number so large it becomes difficult to picture as individual animals rather than a statistic on a page. Break that number down, and the scale becomes even harder to process. 350,000 blue whales works out to roughly 10 whales killed every single day on average across an entire century, each one an animal that had spent decades growing into a 200-ton giant capable of outlasting nearly every natural predator it ever encountered. Antarctic waters absorb the heaviest losses. This region, home to the dense krill feeding grounds discussed earlier in this story, once supported the largest population of blue whales anywhere on the planet. Whaling fleets targeting this population removed an estimated 99% of Antarctic blue whales within just a few decades, a collapse so severe that entire feeding grounds that once echoed with whale calls fell almost completely silent. Peak killing years reveal just how fast this collapse happened. During some of the busiest whaling seasons in the mid-20th century, fleets killed tens of thousands of blue whales within a single year, driven by competition between nations and a complete absence of any agreed-upon limit. Whaling crews often did not know, and in many cases did not seem to prioritize knowing, how few blue whales actually remained by the time the busiest hunting years arrived. Population estimates from before industrial whaling suggest a global population that may have exceeded 200,000 blue whales. By the time international protections finally arrived, that number had fallen to a small fraction of its original size, with some regional populations reduced so severely that recovery remains incomplete even today. Generations after hunting stopped. Comparing this collapse to the natural predation covered earlier in this story reveals just how different these two forces really are. A single successful orca hunt, rare enough that decades passed before scientists managed to film one, might account for one blue whale death. Industrial whaling accounted for hundreds of thousands, compressed into a period shorter than a single blue whale's own natural lifespan. Recognition of this collapse eventually forced action. International agreements gradually introduced protections through the middle of the 20th century, with a full ban on commercial blue whale hunting finally taking effect through international whaling regulation. By the time that protection arrived, the damage already done had reshaped blue whale populations for generations to come, leaving survivors scattered thin across an ocean that once held hundreds of thousands of them. Every single one of those 350,000 whales represents an animal that had survived deep dives past 1,000 feet, evaded coordinated predator attacks, and carried a heart capable of slowing to 2 beats a minute under pressure that would kill almost anything else alive. None of that mattered against the one predator this species never had time to evolve a defense against. What remains today is a population still working to recover from a collapse this severe, in an ocean that, even decades later, still carries the consequences. Blue whales were not actually the first whales hunted by industrial fleets. For decades before Sven Foyn's explosive harpoon changed everything, whalers pursued slower, easier targets first, species that floated once killed and could not outrun a rowboat. Understanding why blue whales came later and why they then became the single most prized target once hunting them became possible tells its own important part of this story. Right whales earned their name from exactly this history, considered the right whale to hunt because of their slow speed and tendency to float after death, making recovery simple for crews working from small boats. Sperm whales followed, valuable for a specific type of oil found in their heads, hunted extensively using methods that still could not realistically catch a blue whale moving at full speed. Blue whales, along with other fast-swimming rorqual species, remained essentially safe from commercial hunting throughout this earlier era, protected entirely by the same speed and power covered throughout this story. A rowboat crew with a hand-thrown harpoon stood no reasonable chance against an animal capable of the burst speeds discussed earlier, and a killed blue whale, denser and less buoyant than a right whale, often sank before it could even be recovered. Everything changed once steam power and explosive harpoons entered the picture. Suddenly, speed no longer protected a blue whale from pursuit, and a harpoon capable of killing quickly, combined with equipment developed to keep a carcass afloat for recovery, removed the last practical barriers that had kept this species safe for centuries. Once catchable, blue whales instantly became the most valuable target available, precisely because of the size discussed at the very start of this story. A single blue whale could yield roughly double the oil of a much smaller whale species, meaning fleets could process fewer, larger animals for the same or greater total profit compared to hunting smaller whales in higher numbers. Every ton of extra size, every advantage that had made this animal nearly untouchable by natural predators, became a direct financial incentive once human hunters finally gained the tools to catch one. This shift explains the brutal efficiency behind the collapse described previously. Whaling fleets did not need to catch more whales to turn a massive profit. They needed to catch the biggest ones, and blue whales, the largest animal ever to exist, sat at the very top of that list the moment they became a realistic target at all. Economic records from the whaling industry reflect this priority clearly, with blue whales commanding premium value per animal compared to smaller species hunted during the same era. Fleets actively sought out blue whale populations specifically, following the seasonal movement toward the dense Antarctic feeding grounds discussed earlier, treating that predictable migration pattern as a resource to be mapped and exploited rather than a survival strategy this species had spent millions of years perfecting. The very traits that had kept blue whales safe from every natural predator for so long, size chief among them, became the exact reason human hunters prioritized them the moment those traits stopped being able to protect them at all. By the middle of the 20th century, the largest animal ever to exist on Earth had been pushed to a population so small that some scientists seriously questioned whether the species could recover at all. Global blue whale numbers, once estimated above 200,000 before industrial whaling began, had collapsed to only a few thousand individuals scattered across the entire planet by the time meaningful protection finally arrived. Some specific regional populations fell even further. Certain groups tracked by researchers dropped to just a few hundred individuals, numbers low enough that basic survival, let alone recovery, seemed genuinely uncertain. This kind of collapse creates problems that go beyond simple population counts. Blue whales rely on finding mates across enormous stretches of open ocean, using the long-distance calls covered earlier in this story to locate each other across hundreds of miles. When a population drops low enough, individuals can become too spread out to reliably find each other at all, turning an already difficult mating process into something close to impossible, regardless of how loud or far-reaching a single call might travel. Genetic diversity took a hit as well. A population reduced this severely narrows the available gene pool for every generation that follows, a consequence that can weaken a species' ability to adapt to disease, environmental change, or other future pressures even long after the original threat, in this case direct hunting, has been removed entirely. International recognition of this crisis arrived gradually, slower than the collapse itself. The International Whaling Commission introduced protections specifically for blue whales during the 1960s, followed years later by a broader moratorium covering commercial whaling for most species. By the time these protections took full effect, the species had already spent decades at population levels low enough to qualify among the most endangered animals on the entire planet. Recovery since then has been real, but slow, shaped by exactly the biological realities that made the initial collapse so dangerous. An animal that takes years to reach full size, invests enormous energy into each single calf, and can live past 90 years does not rebuild a population quickly, even once every direct hunting threat has been removed. Generations pass slowly for a species built around a long lifespan and low birth rate, a survival strategy that worked well against natural predation but offered little defense against a population crash this severe. Some regional populations remain far below historic numbers even today, decades after protection began, a lingering reminder of just how close this animal came to permanent disappearance. Antarctic blue whales in particular, the population hit hardest during peak whaling years, continue showing some of the slowest recovery of any blue whale group tracked by researchers. An animal capable of outlasting nearly every predator nature ever produced came within a relatively narrow margin of disappearing entirely, undone not by teeth or claws, but by a hunting method it had no possible way to evolve defenses against in time. Picture an ocean once filled with calls powerful enough to cross entire ocean basins, discussed earlier in the story. Then imagine that same ocean falling almost silent within a few short decades. That is roughly what happened across much of the world's oceans during the collapse covered earlier, and the silence that followed changed the underwater world in ways scientists are still working to fully understand. Before industrial whaling, researchers estimate the ocean carried a near constant layer of low-frequency whale calls, blue whales among them, forming a kind of background communication network stretching across entire ocean basins. With population numbers in the hundreds of thousands, calls likely overlapped constantly, creating opportunities for whales to locate each other, coordinate loose movement patterns, and maintain contact across distances that would otherwise feel impossibly isolating. Once populations collapsed to a small fraction of their original size, that network thinned dramatically. Fewer whales meant fewer calls, and greater distances between individuals meant those calls, even at the incredible range covered earlier in this story, had a much harder time actually reaching another whale capable of responding. Researchers studying recordings from different points across the 20th century have documented this shift directly, noting periods where certain regions grew measurably quieter as local populations shrank toward their lowest recorded numbers. Recovery, since protections took effect, has not restored the ocean to its original soundscape, even in areas where whale numbers have slowly started rebuilding. Modern shipping traffic, industrial activity, and offshore construction have introduced an entirely new layer of underwater noise, competing directly with the same low-frequency range blue whales rely on for long-distance communication. A recovering population now has to communicate across an ocean that sounds fundamentally different than it did before industrial whaling began, filled with a new kind of noise the species never had to account for throughout its evolutionary history. Some researchers describe this as a kind of acoustic masking, where mechanical noise from ships and industrial equipment overlaps directly with the frequency range blue whales use most, effectively shrinking the real-world range of a call that should, in theory, still be capable of crossing hundreds of miles. A whale calling out today may reach far fewer potential listeners than the same call would have reached a century earlier, not because the call itself grew weaker, but because the ocean around it grew louder. This shift carries real consequences for a species already working to rebuild from historically low numbers. Every advantage covered earlier in this story, including a communication system built to overcome vast open ocean distances, now operates in an environment actively working against it, adding a modern complication onto a recovery process already slowed by a naturally long lifespan and low birth rate. Scientists monitoring underwater soundscapes continue tracking exactly how much this noise affects communication success, migration timing, and even stress levels in recovering whale populations. The ocean blue whales are rebuilding their numbers within today looks and sounds nothing like the one their ancestors evolved inside, adding an unexpected new challenge to a recovery already measured in careful decades rather than quick, easy years. Add up every confirmed natural predator attack on an adult blue whale ever documented by science, and the total barely reaches double digits. Add up vessel strikes affecting large whales across the same research period, and the comparison becomes almost impossible to ignore. Modern shipping now poses a far greater measurable threat to the species than every natural predator combined. Major shipping lanes often cross directly through blue whale feeding and migration routes, particularly along stretches of coastline where deep water feeding grounds sit close to busy ports. Regions along the California coast and near Sri Lanka rank among the most heavily studied overlap zones, where research teams have documented repeated vessel strike incidents involving large whales moving through some of the busiest commercial shipping routes on the planet. Size, normally this animal's greatest advantage, offers little protection here. Every defense covered throughout this story evolved to answer a living, reacting predator, something capable of being sensed, outswum, or fought off directly. A cargo ship does not react to a whale's presence the way a predator would, and even a fully alert blue whale can struggle to move out of the path of a vessel weighing tens of thousands of tons and moving far faster than any dive can outpace in the shallow water near the surface, where these strikes typically happen. Detection adds another layer to the problem. Large ships generate relatively little of the kind of low-frequency signal a blue whale might instinctively associate with danger, unlike the pressure changes created by another animal swimming nearby. A whale resting or feeding near the surface may have surprisingly little warning before a vessel closes the final stretch of distance, especially in busy shipping corridors where multiple ships pass through the same water regularly. Researchers tracking known vessel strike cases note that surviving whales often carry visible propeller scarring or evidence of blunt impact injuries, a pattern distinct enough from predator bite marks that scientists can usually identify the cause fairly reliably. These documented cases represent only a portion of total incidents, since many strikes likely go unreported or unnoticed entirely, especially those involving whales that do not survive long enough to be found and examined. Efforts to reduce this risk have grown in recent years. Some ports and shipping authorities have introduced voluntary or mandatory speed restrictions through known high-risk zones during peak migration seasons, along with adjusted shipping lanes designed to route traffic around the densest whale activity when possible. Early results from some of these programs suggest meaningful reductions in strike risk are achievable, though full compliance and consistent enforcement across international shipping remain ongoing challenges. This entire threat represents something genuinely new in this species' long evolutionary story. Every natural predator covered throughout this story arrived slowly over millions of years, giving blue whales time to develop the defenses that made them so difficult to successfully hunt. Cargo ships arrived within a single century, moving through water on a schedule that has nothing to do with whale behavior at all, leaving a species built to survive almost anything nature could produce, now facing a threat built entirely by human infrastructure instead. Strip away human technology entirely, and the honest answer to this question becomes almost anticlimactic. Nothing currently alive in the ocean stands a realistic chance of consistently challenging a healthy, adult blue whale, and nothing on the horizon looks likely to change that anytime soon. Every advantage covered across this entire story stacks together into a defense system nature has never fully solved. Armor thick enough to blunt teeth, a tail strike powerful enough to break bone in a single motion, a heart and circulatory system built to survive extremes that would kill almost anything else alive. Speed bursts fast enough to create real separation, backed by dives deep enough and long enough to disappear entirely into water, Few predators can follow, a voice powerful enough to cross an entire ocean basin. None of this happened by accident. Millions of years of pressure, tested repeatedly by every predator capable of applying it, produced an animal that mostly wins by default, simply by being too costly, too risky, and too physically overwhelming to challenge directly. For a new natural predator to seriously threaten this balance, evolution would need to solve several problems at once: matching or exceeding a blue whale's burst speed, developing a way to survive or avoid a tail strike capable of breaking bone, coordinating group behavior sophisticated enough to overcome an animal with no fixed hiding spot, and doing all of this while still making the energy math worthwhile compared to easier, safer prey. Orcas already come closer to this combination than any other living predator, and even they succeed only rarely under narrow conditions. After hours of coordinated effort, most groups never attempt at all. Climate change and shifting ocean conditions could theoretically alter this balance over time, changing where krill concentrate, how far whales need to migrate, or how predator populations distribute themselves across changing water temperatures. Whether any of these shifts eventually favor a new natural threat remains far beyond what current research can predict with any real confidence, a question likely to unfold across timescales longer than any human study could realistically track. Humans remain the clear exception to everything described in this story, the one force capable of bypassing every defense discussed simply by never needing to engage with any of it directly. That threat has already been tested at devastating scale, and the recovery still underway today shows exactly how differently this species handles a threat it never had time to evolve against, compared to the natural challenges it has answered successfully for millions of years. What remains, for now, is an animal still holding the title it has carried since before recorded history, the largest creature this planet has ever produced, nearly untouchable by nature, vulnerable only to a predator that arrived within the last blink of its species' long story. Somewhere out past sight of any coastline, one of these animals is diving right now, heart slowing toward 2 beats a minute, tail ready to answer anything that gets too close, moving through darkness few other creatures could survive. Ocean predators still back away. After everything covered in this story, it is easy to understand exactly why.